right. Thank you guys for all being here tonight in the auditorium and also through the webcast. Alpha Epsilon chapter here down here in LaGrange has been a very welcome host for us. So we're just going to go ahead and get right started into our presentation tonight. We're going to have Dean Shook, Dr. Dean, Associate Provost, and Dean of Student Engagement here at LaGrange College come and give us a really entertaining talk. He's put a lot of hard work into it, so I would ask you all to help me welcome up here for our presentation.
Thank you, Hill. To risk management. As Hill pointed out, my name is Marc Shook. I'm the Associate Provost and Dean of Students here at LaGrange College. Been here about 4 years. The University of Texas at Austin, the University of Virginia, the University of Alabama, and Presbyterian College. So my expertise in working with Greek level small private liberal arts environment, but also large state flagships. A little bit more about me. I received my undergraduate education at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, where I was president of a 100-man chapter. So I am Greek myself and very fond of Greek life. Additionally, moving from there, I received my J.D. from the University of Alabama School of Law and my Ph.D. In Higher Education Administration from the University of Virginia. So let's start with the most important. Members of ADG should even care about risk management in total. The easiest answer, probably the one that's being held most by individuals in this room, is we care about risk management. We talk about the vast majority in creating an environment that can keep you and your chapter free from legal. I want to reframe the concept a little bit, reframe the way you think about it. And the first would be, do you love your brothers? The second, do you want to help keep your brothers safe? Third, do you want to create an environment that will help each and every one of your brothers graduate from college? Again, do you generally approach each day not wanting to harm another individual? And if the answer to that is yes, there needs to be a whole different webinar. And finally, do you want people to see your fraternity and fraternity events as something safe that all people would be comfortable attending? So likely you can figure out the lens shifting involves from thinking about risk management in terms of legal liability and thinking about it in a manner of creating a caring environment. Care not only for your brothers, care not only for your fraternity, care not only for the really pretty girl that you've been trying to impress for months and get to the fraternity house or to a fraternity event. It's even care for your parents, who that if you do get sued are going to suffer as greatly or more than you. And in reality, risk management is not rocket science. It's not something that fat ball guys like me sit around thinking about ways to keep you from having fun in college. Different. Hell, your fraternity experience is different than mine just 20 years ago. Every night when I go to bed and I put to sleep my 3 young children, I thank God that camera phones did not exist when I was in college. Because if they did, I probably would not be here as a dean of students. The reality that you have is different. So when you hear individuals telling stories about fraternity life back in the day, you have to ignore that. Your Greek experience is your Greek experience, and you are surrounded by a new form of legal liability and expectations and insurance that has never been seen before. So we are going to talk a little bit about that today. So I've created an idea that I think may be beneficial in explaining some of the peculiarities about risk management. And at this time, I'm going to ask Patrick Riley, former ADG president, to come down because we are going to play a game of 20 questions. Hopefully you all are familiar with 20 questions, but we are going to reframe it. Have a seat, my friend. We're going to reframe it and put this in the status of a deposition. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, a deposition is part of a lawsuit. So basically when a lawsuit is filed, the court allows both parties to engage in what's called discovery, and that is legally compelled sharing of information. Now, a deposition is an interview. So if you are part of a lawsuit, The attorney on the other side will call you, will put you under oath, put a video camera in front of you, and then require you to ask questions. And that's what I'm going to do with Patrick here. Now, today, I will be playing the role of the plaintiff's attorney. Patrick will be playing the role of a mute fraternity member. The situation at issue here is I have brought suit against ADG, its president, the national organization, the college, and anyone who happened to be remotely associated with the event that has caused irreparable emotional harm and distress for my client as a result of your actions. So in this scenario, he's going to get a softball on the first question, but what I want you to do is really reframe this and imagine that you were sitting here and having to answer these questions. And then also think back to the way in which you or your chapter operates. And again, picture yourself on camera having to answer yes or no. Now, one of the things that you will get from this, a good attorney would object to about half of these as leading. But again, this is education, so. Again, let's go and get started. The individuals involved here, as I mentioned, the fraternity member, his name is Brother X. My plaintiff is suing Brother X, the national fraternity, the college, and anyone else involved. My client, and that's all I'm going to refer to, the plaintiff in this case is a female, and she's suing for sexual assault, sexual misconduct, and negligence. And that's all you know. You ready to start, Patrick?
Sure.
Okay. Were you present at the ADG fraternity mixer that occurred on the evening of Friday, March 4th, 2016 at the Pizza Spot in LaGrange College? You can just say yes.
Yes.
Okay. The others, we're just going to assume that you're going to nod. How's that?
Sure.
Okay. Were you aware that there were other students at the mixer other than members of ADG and other student organizations? So there were individuals present who were not members of ADG and not members of the other organization to which the mixer occurred. While at the mixer, were you aware that in addition to alcohol being served by the establishment in the front of the venue, that there were coolers of beer in the back where the mixers were taking place?
Yes.
Were you aware that brothers of ADG had purchased this beer with the intention that it would be consumed only by brothers? To your knowledge, were there sober party monitors at the venue?
Yes.
Do you remember if these sober party monitors were wearing wristbands or t-shirts or identifying themselves as individuals with responsibility for risk management?
Yes.
Were you aware that other non-fraternity members had access to the coolers of beer and that the sober party monitors never took steps to keep this from occurring?
Yes.
Good. Did you observe the game of beer pong that was being played on top of a 4x4 placed over a pool table in the back room where the mixer occurred?
Yes.
Did you see Brother X, new member, ever participate in a game of beer pong?
Yes.
Is it true that each new member, was required to find a girl that they did not know at the event and play at least one game of beer pong at the mixer?
Yes.
Can you confirm that if the new member, did not play the game of beer pong with a stranger, that they would have to cover their face in pizza dough and lay under a sun lamp once back to the fraternity house?
Yes.
Is it true that each new member, was required to fill at least one cup with Everclear that was provided by the pledge master, new member educator, for the game of beer pong?
Yes.
Are you aware that Brother X is under the age of 21?
Yes.
Are you aware that Brother X was not wearing a wristband required by the establishment to show who was and who was not 21 years of age?
Yes.
Have you ever been to another ADG event where you saw a member drinking alcohol who was under the age of 21?
Yes.
Did you see Brother X participate in multiple games of beer pong with my client, plaintiff, in this case?
Yes.
Did you personally notice that either Brother X or my client to show signs of intoxication following their third game of beer pong?
Yes.
To my knowledge, to your knowledge, Why were there no waters or no non-salty snacks available in the back room where the mixer occurred? Did you see my client fall to the ground and have to be picked up by Brother X and the ADG new member educator following the game of beer pong?
Yes.
Did you witness Brother X throw up in a trash can following the game of beer pong?
Yes.
Can you comment on whether you thought Brother X or my client was intoxicated to the point of being unable to provide legal consent for a sexual encounter?
I cannot.
Okay, one final question. Did you receive the tweet from the pledge master, new member educator, showing a picture of my client and Brother X leaving the venue with the caption, quote, Brother X is going to taste some dark meat tonight, unquestioned mark.
Yes.
Are you aware that my client is an African American female?
Yes.
Okay, that's enough. You can have a seat. Okay, so hopefully by the point of these questions, these are all direct. Every one of these 20 questions that was read tonight covers a portion of risk management. Everything in here comes from FIPG policy. ADG as a whole is governed by FIPG policy. Every question that I asked is one that can come up in a lawsuit in a very targeted way to basically shift the burden of responsibility away from the plaintiff. This is the new concept that came in to really damage fraternity organizations. It's the concept that even though the plaintiffs may be negligent, it's also the fraternity that could be negligent as well. Every single one of those questions shifts the burdens of responsibility onto you. So if you go back through them, they're very simple. One, if you're having a mixer, you can't have anybody else that's not part of that mixer present at the venue. That's clear FIPG policy. You're also required to have a guest list. I also asked, were you aware that there was common source alcohol being served in the back? That is against policy. Now, an interesting thing, the reason that I would be asking these questions as the plaintiff's attorney are obvious. Are you also aware that if you get sued, a lawyer from your insurance company is going to come down and ask you some of these questions? Because once you say yes, once you say we were at a third-party venue, which under that, the third-party vendor should be selling alcohol. Once you identify that there was common source alcohol there, your insurance company's like, you broke our rules. We're not going to cover you for insurance. They are going to leave you out to dry. And that is the reality. That's why you don't have common source alcohol. Notice I put that it was even worse in the fact that there was alcohol provided with funds from ADG, another thing you cannot do. Additionally, in there, later in the scenario, it pointed out that the new member educator was actually providing, now granted I put Everclear in there, if anyone ever does a game of beer pong with Everclear at any point in time or anything flammable, you really should have your head checked because it's not going to end up well. And you are going to end up in one of these scenarios where someone much more intimidating than me is going to be asking you these questions because don't drink anything that's flammable. If that's the one thing you take away from this risk management talk, don't drink anything that's flammable. And it's not meant to be a joke. I've been in judicial affairs for nearly 15 years, and I've had to ask that question to multiple individuals to which they were like, oh, you've heard of Everclear before, R151. That idea. Again, another thing that you saw in here were sober party monitors. The importance of sober party monitors to your risk management is key. They have to be there, they have to be identifiable, and they have to do work. If they see things going wrong, they have to take steps. Everything in this scenario is going to end up with Brother X in the middle of a Title IX rape case to which they are going to prove that he did not have or she did not have legal capacity to give consent for sex. It doesn't matter if she initiated the contact, anything along those lines. One of the things that under the Title IX situation that you are under is to have training for your sober party monitors to make sure that Brother X stays out of this scenario, that Brother X does not leave this venue with my plaintiff, that someone is getting this girl home safe and sound because she is intoxicated. Again, the other things that you saw were beer pong. Beer pong is obviously one of the favorite hobbies of college students today. One of the things that FIPG policy clearly states is you cannot have drinking games at fraternity events. Point, line, clear. It's not up for negotiation. It's there in your policies. So this is something that you as a chapter are really going to have to struggle with and deal with and think through reasonably. Because again, it is set out for you that this is not something you can do at fraternity events. Again, you also got a little taste of hazing in there, and everyone kind of laughed when I did the pizza dough face. That's a real thing. I saw that in my career. Don't do that. It sounds funny, but it ended up a lot of people going to the hospital. Everything in here, even the situation of coming up with something as intimidating of we want our new members to meet new people, so we're going to require that you actually find a stranger to play a game of beer pong with, sounds innocuous enough, but when it comes to it, or it comes out in light and a disposition along those lines, that's hazing. Obviously the pizza dough face is hazing. Even requiring new members to do something as innocuous as find a stranger to play a game of beer pong with, forcing them to do anything that they might not do on their own volition or might not willingly choose to do can be considered hazing. And then you got in there with some of the care standards, and then obviously I put the social media text in there for a very obvious reason. I made the comment somewhat jokingly earlier in the presentation that I thank God I didn't go to college in a time of social media. You do, and the realities of it are, this is what we're now seeing. Whenever I'm reading through legal cases and seeing, it's the social media evidence that is so damning in these cases. You have to be smart what you choose to post, because you never know what that is going to do. Obviously this one was offensive, and it was meant to be offensive. That's kind of a worst case scenario, like that's a really bad idea. But some can even be less demanding. You just never know, because you don't know if you post a picture of a couple making out and put a joke underneath it, if that's later going to become evidence in a sexual assault case. You have to be very careful and wise in the realm of social media. So again, all of this, and having Patrick here answer those questions, were meant to spur you on to a new way of thinking about risk management. Because again, this was put in a legal context, but my point is that I don't want you to do it just because you're scared of getting sued. If that gets you to do it, then fine. But the reality, there should have been some sympathies in here. There should have been sympathies with Brother X of, man, I really wish a sober party monitor would have stepped up and did his job so Brother X wasn't sitting here dealing with a potential lawsuit, or I'm sitting here having to answer these questions. You should have also gained some sympathy for the individual referred to as the plaintiff or the client in there of, you know, with just a little bit of safekeeping, a little bit more care on the part of the fraternity, this girl could have been kept out of a situation that obviously is emotional enough that led her to file an actual lawsuit. So if you can do these things and start these things and help realize the importance of how just small things can help keep you, your chapter, your brothers you love, and your family out of trouble, then you'll be off to a good start. So with that, questions? Yes?
You said there were no drinking games allowed at a fraternity event. Would a typical Friday or Saturday night be considered a fraternity event?
Okay, so for the benefit of everyone participating in this call, the question that was asking, I made reference to the FIPG policy of which you're governed for, I made the point that drinking games are not allowed at fraternity events. So the question was asked, what about just a regular Friday night? Would that be considered a fraternity event? Now, in the eyes of the law and the attorneys that come in, because the reality is, in this scenario, one thing that you need to understand, the law is not geared in a manner that prejudices fraternal organization. It's not. The law is not in favor of anyone. The only product that the law serves are the attorneys. So everything from legal opinion depends on who you ask, because good attorneys can make same valid arguments on either side. So if there was a situation that arose at a regular Friday night, it wasn't a registered student organization function, it wasn't on Q with the institution, something along those lines. The attorney for the college or whoever representing the individual from the fraternity being sued is going to say, hey, this is not a regular organization, this was a couple of guys. The attorney on the other side is going to come in and sit down in a deposition and say, regular Friday night, how many people were there? How many brothers were there? Wow, that looks like about 70% of the entire chapter was present that evening. Was the president there? Were there officers there? Then yeah, that sounds like a fraternity event. So again, it's all in the matter of interpretation. You never know where that's going to go with the judge in this particular scenario, but I think you're wise to keep risk management applies for every night, every time someone is doing or representing the fraternity, because it's important to think about. There's obviously going to be evenings where there's an idiot in the chapter. That is a concept of Greek life risk management that has been around for years and years. Rick Barnes has gone around and done that talk. The interesting aspect is looking at risk management from the standpoint of when is the idiot in the chapter also now bringing liability or responsibility onto the chapter as a whole. I know here at LaGrange College, we worked with our IFC, we have a series of clear points identified when does individual behavior cross over to group behavior. But if you're not familiar with that at your institution and your chapter members aren't aware of that, that's a topic of information that needs to be covered. So thank you. Yes, you in the back.
Another question was, you said common source alcohol. At what point does it become a common source? 6-pack, 12-pack, 18, when does it become a common source alcohol, in which case someone can refer to as that?
Okay, so the question was, I made a reference to common source alcohol, which is a term of art in the law, and where does a cooler transform into a 6-pack for a fraternity member into common source in the eyes of the law? Well, let's start with the easiest form of common source, and they start at nose. A big bucket of Hunch Punch is a bad idea, and the judges do not like this. That is common source at its finest, because typically there's Everclear and all sorts of things along those lines. So Hunch Punch, bad. And one of the reasons it's bad is because I've been in a situation where I had to track down 200 individuals that had been at a fraternity party because someone had died the following night from what we knew was a communicable disease. And we had to track everybody down and get them inoculated because we didn't know if perhaps any of her saliva had gotten Hunch Punch. So Hunch Punch, bad on multiple ideas. The second one are kegs. Kegs of beer that's common source. You can't monitor who's coming out. Other forms of common source, Jello shots. I can remember one fraternity at this particular college posted a picture on Facebook. This was when Facebook was still used by college students. And the fraternity had actually spelled out the 3 letters of the fraternity in shot glasses with a caption inviting ladies to come to the house and partake. Another really bad idea. All of those things are common source in the fact that there's no one monitoring who has or who cannot gain access to those. So by most fraternities' risk management policies, you are dictated, you show up at a BYOB event, you're required to have no more than 6 beers for yourself, you turn them over to the fraternity, they give you 6 tickets, and then you exchange back and forth. But even a cooler with 6 beers or 16 beers or 62 beers that's left in the corner without anybody watching it and folks can go and grab whatever they want out of it, that's most likely going to be construed as common source. Yes, sir.
At a fraternity event at a third-party venue, is that third-party venue allowed to serve alcohol?
Yes. So one of the things that you have through FIPG are third-party vendor contracts. Now there are a couple of stipulations. They have to have $1 million general liability, which almost all vendors that serve alcohol do. But you actually sign paperwork with them. And third-party vendors are an excellent means of removing risk or transferring risk, because basically in a situation where you use as a fraternity a third-party vendor, then the risk goes to them. They're required to do the carding. They're required to see who's served. They're required to have some form of figuring out who's 21 and who's not 21, and they also have a legal liability not to overserve. So one of the good lessons from risk management that may apply to chapters that live in cities larger than LaGrange is the use of third-party vendors and having events off campus. Sir?
As the president, what particularly am I liable for?
Everything.
pertaining to if I'm there and if I'm not there?
Yes.
The whole
So,
program.
so the question that the chapter president chimed in and said, as chapter president, what am I liable for and what am I not liable for? One of the happiest days of my life with my girlfriend at the time was when I gave up my fraternity presidentship. Because I actually did have a situation where I was at home with my girlfriend later that night and was awoken by the police. And I walked out my apartment door. I could see my fraternity house from there. I was like, wow, there are a lot of cop cars at the fraternity. Guess where I'm going? And thankfully, it wasn't directly to jail. I actually did have to go back to the house and speak to the officers. But one of the things where the chapter president is always going to be thrown on the line is because the buck stops with you. You're required by law to create an atmosphere that fosters growth and reduces liability. So even if you are out of town and there is a non-sanctioned event at the house, you will still be named in that lawsuit. That does not mean that you will end up being held personally responsible for that. But any lawsuit brought against a member of your chapter is going to involve individual suit against the chapter president and individual suit against the house. Follow-up question from the chapter president.
Yeah. Does this particularly mean exactly at the house, or if it's at, say, just a different venue? If it's not at our house, if it's at a different fraternity's house, as long as it deals with someone from the chapter, it immediately comes back to the chapter president.
Okay, so the question that was asked by the chapter president was, what if it's a situation that only involves a couple of guys at another fraternity house or at an off-campus venue? And that actually goes back to that first question, what is deemed a fraternity event? So for example, let's say something strange. Somebody actually breaks into your house and steals paraphernalia, a paddle, flag, something along those lines. And angered by this assault to your fraternity, 5 guys elect to go over there and there's a fight, and in the middle of the fight, somebody gets a bottle broken over their head and somebody goes to the hospital with massive stitches, then has to drop out of school, things along those lines. In that scenario, yes, that could be considered a fraternity event, even though it happened at another organization. Particularly, now here's where the legal analysis will come from in there. If it's just 5 guys that are sitting on the couch, somebody rolls in and says, hey, they stole our stuff, let's go get it, and they run over there and get in a fight, likely no liability for you. But if you were present or another officer was present in the situation, or one of the officers was one of the 5 guys who went over there and got in the fight, and there looks like there's officer oversight, meaning there's some condemnation of acceptance from the chapter, then yeah, you're probably going to get sued. And that's the realities of the scenario. So it all goes back, what is a fraternity event, what is not a fraternity event, and those things are going to be broken down. How many people were there? Did officers know about it? Did officers do anything to try to stop it? And it's just going to be a case-by-case scenario. Sir?
Suppose a brother breaks fraternity rules, like strict rules set by the fraternity, and then he gets in discipline by the fraternity, but at the same time some legal trouble will fall to the fraternity. Will he still be at risk or at fault, or that does then fall to the individual?
Okay, so the question, and let me make sure that I phrase this correct. What if an individual fraternity member engaged in an action that not only violates a college policy, a state, federal, or local ordinance, but it's also a violation of fraternity policy? Where is that action going to come back and possibly result in liability for the house as a whole? So a lot of that's going to depend on the case-by-case scenario. If it's one guy who accidentally overdoses on Ritalin and just goes in a rampage and rips a bathroom apart in a dorm or something along those lines, that's a scenario where an individual acting on his own was the idiot in the chapter, and there's probably not going to be any transference of liability. But again, if you put that into a scenario where a group of guys are dealing marijuana out of the fraternity house or out of a situation, a fraternity event, and it's commonly known and the chapter doesn't do anything to stop it, or good Lord, they're able to introduce chapter minutes, or somebody comes and does a deposition and be like, we talked about this in chapter, we told these guys to stop, then that's a situation where you now move from, okay, this is two idiots in the chapter that are going to get in trouble with the school and the fraternity. They're going to be disciplined by the fraternity, and they're also going to be disciplined by the law, most likely. But now you move into where the fraternity had notice and did nothing. I mean, that's what the law of negligence is. Do you have a duty? Was there a breach of duty? And with breach comes, did you have notice of something duty? Notice of that duty. You as fraternity men are all on notice. You have a duty to keep people that come to your events safe, sober, and free from harassment. And that's when it comes in as an attorney act, you had a duty to do this. Did you breach this duty? And that's a different scenario when you're able to go in and say, yes, we had an event, we had sober party monitors in place, we had a situation to determine who was drinking under 21 and who was not. Our sober party monitors removed people that weren't following the rules. At one point in time, there was somebody a female that got intoxicated. We had her driven home, or we had her, exited with her two friends. We made sure that she was safe. Those are where the law comes back and said, good, thank you. You did what you were supposed to do. And even when you're doing everything right, things can still go wrong. I mean, the fact that if you hear of anyone ever being sued or arrested does not mean that they did something wrong, because 9 times out of 10, you can sue anybody for anything at any point in time, and you can be arrested at any point in time for anything. Don't jump to the conclusion that if those things occur, that somebody obviously did something wrong. So the fact is, if you have a fraternity brother arrested or anything along those lines, it doesn't mean that there's automatically going to be liability in the house. You have to let the system work out. Okay?
What's a good guidelines about how many set of monitors will be yet?
That is a question that I would seek guidance from your national office. So I'm not a representative of ADG and would not want to overstep my bounds of giving you that. But I would say you want to make sure that you have enough that if there are 2 incidents occurring at the same time, that you don't have enough sober party monitors to cover that situation. And that's typically when things snowball and completely go off the hook or crazy or anything along those lines, is when it happens. There's a guy that gets in a fight with his girlfriend, a verbal argument on the dance floor here, and then there's 2 locals that are outside that start fighting, and then in the back of the house or at the back of the party, there's a tussle, and then all of a sudden people are just running and there's mad chaos. You need to have enough sober party monitors, because all those things, one by one, 2 sober party monitors can take care of like that. It happens to probably every chapter that's participating in this talk. It's when things unanticipated happen. And those are the scariest scenarios for risk management. I mean, my living here in LaGrange and working with this environment, knowing our town-gown relationships, my largest risk management nightmare for our fraternities are not you. I generally have good faith and confidence in your ability to manage situations and do them in a classy manner. What I worry about is 4 truckloads of high school kids from one of the county schools showing up and wanting to fight because they got nothing better to do in LaGrange. That's my, other than active shooter and bird flu and things like that, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. All right, Hill, are there other questions from other chapters? Okay, good. I'm glad to know. Yes?
Well, I have a question. In regards to terms, during your presentation you were saying pledge honesty, new member. How does that relate in terms of hazing?
Okay, so one of the reasons that I did that is because there's a lot of nomenclature that's used out there. And if an attorney is going to be a complete and utter jackass during a deposition, because they're going to intentionally try to get under your skin and get an emotional response, so then they can show that 1 5-second clip of you saying a bad word or calling them a dirty name. That's what's going to come out from your disposition in front of the judge. And always realize anybody that you feel ever trying to make you warm under the collar, they're trying to get a reaction out of you, and you're better not giving it to them. If you really want to piss somebody off, just remain effective and have a clear logical thing. So the reason that I did that in that scenario According to what you see with from FIPG and National IFC, the phrase rush doesn't exist anymore. It's recruitment, even though that's not a term that's used here that much. In the same way that the difference between pledge and pledge master versus new member and new member educator. I mean, I know if I'm representing ADG in a lawsuit, I'm going to be using new member and new member educator, because just the phrase pledge and pledge master, it implies hazing in its outset. So again, if that is phrases that you're using within your chapter, I would encourage you to rethink those and rethink them in a real life scenario. One of the largest hazing cases I was ever involved with dealt with an organization that was not a Greek letter organization. It was an organization affiliated with athletics, about a 250 person organization that we had to interview half that number. And within this, they had designated new members into 3 kind of categories, and they all had utterly and completely demeaning names. And it was whenever we were doing those interviews, and I would use those phrases in front of the attorneys, they would just gasp. And you saw the guys being like, man, I wish beforehand we would have got rid of those names, because in this hazing organization, it sounds like we're already guilty. So just be careful of the nomenclature that you use and how that could make people perceive the organization. Yes, sir.
This is a question from another chapter. It states, if we have a house off campus that is not sanctioned by our university and the brothers of the house have a party, would that be considered an ADG event, even if it is not for ADG?
Okay, that's a great question, and a lot of that's going to go down to the reality of who's there, what notice is given about the event, and by that, meaning is it just a random Friday night that a bunch of people show up, get on their cell phones, and then all of a sudden 10 turns into 50, it turns into 100, turns into 200, or is this an advertised event? Come to this house, it may not have ADG on the flyer, but come to this house on this time, this day for a toga party, pajama jammy jam, whatever it may be. That's all going to be nuanced in the details, but if you go through the analysis that I said earlier, who's there? Are there officers there? Does it look like an ADG party? Are half the people there wearing letters? Then yeah, a good attorney is going to make the argument that yes, that's an ADG event. But again, it's not as clean as, well, we know this is a fraternity house, owned, operated, monitored by the institution versus this is a private residence. But you have to be careful. Again, because if you have half your fraternity there, people in letters, there are officers there, then yeah, an attorney's going to come in and say, looks like, you've heard the phrase, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. That same kind of analysis would be applied to that. Okay, last chance, everyone. Yes, sir.
What exactly would be considered hazing?
What exactly would be considered hazing? It's a good question because it can be an amorphous term. Hazing by the book, and FIPG has their own definition. Every state that's represented here has their own definition. But long and short of it is hazing is requiring any individual on a probationary status. And a probationary status is new member, neophyte, whatever phrase you want to use, but they have to do something in order to get initiated. It's subjecting any probationary member to conduct that A, they don't want to do, or that interferes with their safety or ability to complete life functions. I.e., one of the ones that the National Interfraternity Conference has worked to get rid of are hell weeks. There's periods where new members are required to stay at the house for 48 hours, 72 hours straight, not required to go to class, or they're sleep deprived, things along those lines. So even though you hear from Hell Weeks, you can hear new members talk about, that was the best time I ever had because I really got to know my new members. Courts of law and attorneys are going to come in and say, if you are doing anything to your new members that depriving them of sleep for a long period of time, making them do things that they don't want to do or wouldn't do on their own accord. So for example, most of your personal servitude things, you know, if you think about it, it's not a big deal, but if I'm deposing you and I'm sitting you down as a new member, and I may be getting to more aggressive forms of hazing, but I'm asking you, did you really want to get out of your bed at 4 o'clock in the morning and go buy 2 tacos and a can of dip for your fraternity brother? You probably wouldn't do that unless you were a new member being required to do that. And that's where it's going to shift from a kind of innocent act to something that could be hazing. Because everybody jumps in the same manner with sexual assault. Everyone assumes that they know what it is, that it's the guy lurking in the bushes that jumps out. In colleges, it's never that. It's very rarely that. College is almost always 99% acquaintance rape that's alcohol involved. Everyone thinks they know that hazing is paddling. I've seen forced consumption of things that you would just make you nauseous. Goldfish eating. I've dealt with iron on metal chairs. I've dealt with bows and toes on glass. I mean, those are rare though. I mean, those physical things that everyone knows, dude, that's hazing. It's the smaller things that you have to be equally aware of, and that's the errands, the personal servitude, unwanted consumption, lack of sleep, things along those lines. Okay, good.
We have one more question from one of the chapters. I have recently heard that not telling new members the exact date of their initiation at the beginning of the semester and the start of their education is hazing. Does that have any truth?
So the question was, that was posed was, I have heard, the individual asking the question, I've heard that not providing a new member at the start of their new member education process the exact date of their initiation could be hazing. My response to that would be no. But you have to, because you have to use a reasonableness standard here. If you accept new members and you tell them you can expect to be initiated at the point in time of which we believe you gain a mastery of those core information necessary, and that's likely going to take somewhere between 8 to 10 to 12 weeks, whatever ADG mandates. I apologize, I don't know that. But those are your typical national things, then that's fine. You don't have to give them the exact date. That could take a lot of fun out of it, because it could also vary based on how well the new members have responded in terms of retaining the information that you wanted. So I think to take the idea that not giving them, hey, by the way, at this date, at this time, you're going to be initiated, you don't have to worry about it. I think taking that may be a little too little in terms of what you don't want to do. What could be hazing is if you bring a group of new members in and say, you're never going to know when you're initiated. We're just going to do it whenever. And next thing you know, it's been 16 weeks and they're still not initiated and they still don't know. Or you intentionally hold over, meaning that you carry the new member process over a holiday. That could be considered hazing as well, because there's just no need to do that, particularly if you're making individuals do pledge or new member related activities at a time when they should be at home with their families. Courts are going to look at that very well. Okay, 45 minutes, good time to end. I wanted to thank ADG for inviting me to be a part of this first webinar talk. And again, be safe. Think about the lens that I gave you. Don't think about risk management as just something you do to make sure you don't get sued. If you're behaving correctly, you're loving your brothers, you're wanting to keep people safe, then you'll do the right things. So, thank you. Good night.